My name is Andrew Spainhour, and I am the chair of the board of the Greensboro Public Library Foundation. And on behalf of our board, we welcome you here. We are the sponsor of this event and others like it. We raise private money to enhance and support our incredible 8-branch public library system. And we sponsor events throughout the year. We would love for you to come to future events and to plug in with us related to our programming. We are sponsors of One City, One Book, summer reading for children and adults. And we also work to make our really great branches fantastic physically. I want to, and we invite you to support our work, and I will say more about that at the end of this program. Then we will have the opportunity to build on the corner of Gate City Boulevard and South Benbow our new Windsor-Chavis-NOCO joint use facility, and it will transform, we know, a wonderful community that has not always had the kind of public investment that it deserved. And I want to tell you just a little bit about the facility, because if you don't know about it, I want to make sure that you do. It is a library, it is a recreation center, and it is a park. It will be 72,000 square feet. It will be LEED certified. It is a design marvel. In addition to the library collection, it will offer job training, a teaching kitchen, an indoor track, teen spaces, an indoor pool, basketball facilities, a maker space, computers, Wi-Fi, an amphitheater, natural play areas, multi-use fields, a sensory room, and much more. Raphael Warnock, in an interview recently, said, "A vote is a kind of prayer about the kind of world you want to live in." And so this is the kind of world that we want to live in Greensboro. So I now want to introduce Bridget Blanton, who is our amazing director of the Greensboro Public Library.
Good afternoon. Oh, I didn't hear anything back. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm a call and response gal, okay? So thank you all for joining us this evening. And I hope she's still in the building, because I wanted to make sure that I actually acknowledge we are able to actually have this event because one of the members of our Library Art Commission, who is also on the Gala Planning Committee for the International Civil Rights Museum, reached out to us last year and said, hey, there's a possibility that Bakari Sellers is going to be in town. What do you think? So a special acknowledgement to Pat Levitton and a special acknowledgement to the International Civil Rights Museum for working with us to make this possible. So I wanted to make sure that we said that today. So Pat, if you're still here, thank you. If not, you all make sure you tell her that I acknowledged her, okay? But we are excited this afternoon. We could not be more excited to have this panel. The reason why the actual theme says Anthems of Change is because our History Museum, which many of you may not know, is a part of our library department, right now has up a democracy exhibit that's called Anthems of Change. So thereby today's title, Anthems of Change When Journalists Gather. We are excited to have, and I'll have to do a little bit of a shout out. We'll start over here. Carla Banks, our very own communications department head for the City of Greensboro, with past experience, of course, serving as a journalist and anchor. And then we have Siobhan Riley, who did not know who I was, but I've known her since she was a little girl in the balcony of Mount Zion Baptist Church. And so when I found out that she was moving back to North Carolina, when we were planning this, I said to Beth, give her a call, but don't tell her who's asking. And then Afrique, you know, you all, what will we do with our Carolina Peacemaker? The tradition being continued. Afrique is not only the editor of the new, of the Peacemaker, but she is now a new member of the Greensboro Public Library Foundation. Yay. And then Bakari, thank you so much for being in Greensboro. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for being an activist, an attorney, a journalist, an analyst, all of that, because of people like you and your willingness to come to towns like us to share makes our city better. So on behalf of the City of Greensboro, the Greensboro Public Library, the Greensboro Public Library Foundation, and the Greensboro History Museum, we say thank you and we turn it over to Carla.
Thank you, Bridget. Obviously, I'm excited to be in the company of each of you, and I've been looking forward to moderating this discussion. Some of my questions will be directed to all of you, some will be individual, and then we will open it up to the audience to join the conversation and ask questions. So we certainly thank each of you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. So the first question is for all of you, and Bakari, we'll start with you. Briefly describe the path you took to get to this stage of your respective careers.
That's a really, really good question. It's a big question. Let me start by saying that I was actually born here in Greensboro, North Carolina. My father he ran the public housing authority here for a number of years. My mother taught at Bennett. I went to Vandalia Elementary. My brother went to Allen Middle. Does that still exist? Yes. Yes. And my sister actually graduated from Dudley. And so we moved here when I was 6 years old. We moved back to South Carolina, to Denmark, South Carolina. But I always say that my mom and dad always would tell me that the two most important words in the English language are the words thank you. And they're not nearly said enough. And so I have to start by saying thank you to the foundation, thank you to the library, and tomorrow's going to be an amazing day in the city. But also thank you to all of you all, because in the words of the great American poet, Sean Carter, also known as Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. And so I want to say thank you all. I'll be brief. I mean, my path was, it was faith. My steps were ordered. I'm a product of the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. I'm a product, I always like to say that I'm a child of the movement. My mom, little known fact, my mom was a part of the integrating class of Hamilton High School in Memphis, Tennessee. And my father, of course, was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And of course went to Philadelphia, Mississippi to search for Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, and was involved in the Orangeburg Massacre, was shot, went to prison. My dad went to prison not once but twice. Most people don't know that. Of course, he went to prison in '68, but he also went to prison previously for not being willing to go to Vietnam. And so that was the village that raised me and helped me get to where I am. You know, picking up the phone and having Julian Bond and Marion Barry and Kathleen Cleaver and, you know, all of these individuals, and being able to call them aunt and uncle, Uncle John, and being John Lewis, and, you know, learning from these amazing women. I always tell people that when I think about the strongest people in the movement, I immediately think about Fannie Lou Hamer, I think about Ella Baker, I think about Mamie Till. And those are like 3 of my 4 on my Mount Rushmore of civil rights activists. And so that helped guide me into becoming a lawyer. It's not a lot of people in here. I don't know where that's streaming, but I will tell you that I didn't necessarily go to law school because I wanted to be like Johnny Cochran, a Thurgood Marshall. I went to law school because it's the only graduate school exam with no math. I suck at math. So let's keep that amongst friends. But you know, it was just an amazing opportunity, and ran for office and won. I ran for lieutenant governor and lost, but you know, it's amazing how your steps work and end up on TV. And so I was in DC this morning. I did State of the Union this morning, and so it's just fortuitous, and I'm very grateful to have this platform.
Thank you. Africa.
Wow, I get to follow Bakari, thank you. Well, my path is sort of similar to Bakari in the sense that I am also, I am a direct beneficiary of what went on during the civil rights movement. My parents were very active in that. My parents were at Bennett College when Martin Luther King Jr. came to speak. And they also were at the March on Washington. Also, my father was arrested in 1963, and his picture was on the front of the Greensboro Daily News back then. He was arrested at the square. The square was at like like Elm Street and where Market Street intersect. And about 1,000 A&T students gathered there. My father was an instructor at A&T at the time. And I just preface all that to say that, and that's when he was arrested, on his birthday of all days. I say that because those events, I grew up hearing about them, and I used to see the news clippings, and I remember being 8 years old and looking at those news clippings and saying, Papa, what happened? You were in the newspaper. He said, oh, that wasn't a very good day. But that's how all of those events kind of helped to build and create the Carolina Peacemaker. So I grew up in the newspaper business. I didn't always want to be in the newspaper business. By the time I got to high school, I was like, there's no way. Because I worked in it every summer growing up. You know, whenever there was a break or whatever, I was the girl who I either came to clean up or I was stamping newspapers. And I was the only one. My father drafted just about every cousin that I have. If they went to school at A&T or at UNCG or at Bennett College, wherever it was, they worked at the paper. It's in some form or capacity, some of my cousins. And my sister Sybil became a manager at the paper for a while, and then my sister Heidi, when they grew up, they would, you know, stamp, back then, you know, you stamped paper, so it's like, you know, it's like a label that you put on for each person's address. They sold subscriptions, all that stuff. So I did that also. But I was so much younger than they were at the time that I was sent. Our office was, at that time, was in the Southeastern building, which is downtown. It became some condos now, but they would send me to the public library, which was located downtown. It's the library then that was built by Mr. Lowenstein, who was a famous modernist architect. Anyway, they would send me there, and I would go there and read books, or they would send me on errands to the News and Record to get advertisements that we were also running in our paper, that sort of thing. So I started as kind of like the cleanup girl, and then I would write and have my father he would kind of edit or proofread what I would write, and then try to give me constructive criticism, but it wasn't always very constructive to me. You know, and as I got older, I would say, you know, you're a little harder on me than you are on your students at A&T. And he would say, but I want you to achieve things. I said, yeah, well, you gave me this name. I'm named after this massive continent, and I got the name of a mountain. He said, yeah, but the mountain thing, you know, I want you all to achieve great things, have high aspirations, and that sort of thing. And so that's what he told me as, you know, youth growing up. So I started out as a cub reporter in junior high school. I really got into yearbooks at the time, so I really liked the graphics and that sort of thing, which really wasn't a part of the newspaper until like USA Today became created and that sort of thing. So that's when color and all that good stuff started coming around. And then I went away and I said, I'm not going to do newspapers. So I majored in a science. I was a biology major at A&T. And I graduated, and I did a lot of things in health and in healthcare, and I went into public health and that sort of thing. But I got a call, and you get this call. Some people get the call from a parent that says, I need some help. I think I need some help. You know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think you would be really, really good at it. And you are a people person, and you know, people seem to like you, and I think you'd be really good. And I was like, no way, you know, I'm not going to do this. But you know, when the call comes, you either step up, because you know, I had to think about the legacy that was created and all the work that not just my father and my mom, but my siblings and my cousins put into it. And a lot of them, you know, they get the paper, they don't necessarily work in that particular industry anymore, but I do it now because I really like people. That's the fun part about meeting people and hearing their stories and that sort of thing. Sometimes they come to you with their hair on fire, and sometimes they come to you happy, and sometimes they come to you sad to tell you a story. But that is really intriguing to me, for people to come to you and open up about what's going on in their lives. And that to me, that's a blessing, and that I cherish, the fact that people trust me and trust the paper and trust the people that work at the paper to tell their story.
Well, we're certainly glad you answered the call. Siobhan?
Good evening. The path I took to get here today, really, I have to thank my parents, who are on the front row, Minnie and Calvin Riley. They really taught me the purpose of perseverance and faith, and really that is my testimony. I was always the underdog in school. I was always the person who was told what I couldn't do, what I couldn't achieve, but I'm a living witness that if you keep your faith, you can do whatever you want. And I'm very grateful for that path because I had a teacher in high school, Mr. Herndon. And I was the student who, when I was a kid, I was told that my reading comprehension wasn't where it needed to be. I struggled with reading comprehension as a child, but thank God for Mr. Herndon in the 10th grade. He was the one who helped me turn things around. And I went from a student who struggled with reading comprehension to scoring the top of my class in the 10th grade, getting the highest writing grade in the state. And honestly, that was the moment that I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. So I'm forever grateful for teachers like Mr. Herndon, who taught me how to keep going, taught me perseverance, and that's kind of what got me here. After I went to A&T, Aggie Pride, I had to add that in there. Went to A&T, graduated in 2005, and after that, that's when my career took off. And I would just say the path that I really took, like I said, there's something about faith, because the journalism, especially right now, it's a very tough industry. But one thing that I always learned, there were so many people who told me, you'll never be a journalist. My very first job was in Gainesville, Florida. And I remember there were reporters who said, oh, she just got the job to meet quota in the newsroom, because I was the only person of color in the newsroom. But again, faith, perseverance, and I'm still standing.
Thank you for sharing that. Takes me to my next question, which you already touched on, talking about any particular challenge that each of you want to share. And would you say the challenge was a result of the fact that you are a person of color? Africa, we'll start with you.
Wow. The challenge. Okay, so the challenge of running a newspaper or weekly publication for me is newspapers run on advertising. It's a big part of it. It is key to having a staff. And a lot of local companies, unfortunately, don't really want to run advertising in the paper. Sometimes I perceive it as being not just it's not a woman thing. It's more of a race thing to me, in the sense that we serve a predominantly African American community. And unfortunately, still, even today, sometimes you would think that we're back in the 60s or the 50s, but I don't think that our dollar is valued as much as if they were going to place an ad in a majority paper, which also feeds to the notion that it's difficult to grow. When you don't have the finances, you can't pay, or you can't continue to pay a staff, or you can't even enlist the people who deserve to be paid a really good salary, because you can't afford to pay them. So I find that is a real challenge in the newspaper industry. But today, majority of newspapers are having a hard time because of internet and social media and people getting out their stories, doing their own thing. And that's, and that's just the nature of the beast, but I see them going into shock over it. Whereas black newspapers, we faced a struggle since our inception, and so it's something that we strive to overcome, and I hope that people will subscribe and read it and, and talk about it and that sort of thing. We've been around now, we're in our, 55th year, but it's still definitely a struggle. Yeah.
I'm so glad you touched on that. I had made note of the fact that you started circulating Carolina Peacemaker in 1967. What was the landscape of the newspaper business like at that time?
Okay, so I wasn't...
In Greensboro.
Yeah, I wasn't around then myself. Let's see. What was the landscape? So we were founded by almost a year to the date from before the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So it was still a struggle to get a paper going, but there was a paper that predates the Carolina Peacemaker here in Greensboro called the Future Outlook, and that was in business during the 40s and the 50s and that sort of thing. probably longer than that. But my father knew the person who had started that, and he was ready to retire and stop, and basically gave my parents their blessing to start the paper. So people were hungry to continue having a black publication, because what was happening back then was that the majority papers were, if black people were being talked about in the paper, it was really in a negative light. And so my father and my mom were really more about, let's tell the story straight. Let's talk about African Americans in a positive light. Let's not just talk about who committed what crime. This is not a crime and punishment publication. Let's talk about the sororities and the fraternities and the cotillions and the good stuff that people are doing, the people who are getting the scholarships, the arts, and all that good stuff. So that was what we faced back then. And my father also started because a lot of his students at A&T were not able to get jobs at majority publications. So he would funnel them through the Peacemaker to give them, you could probably get experience at your college paper, yeah, but to have experience at a bona fide community paper and then go out in the world meant the world to a lot of people. And so that's how it got going.
Bakari, any challenge that you want to share?
Yeah, it's been, there are challenges every day, right? I think for me, though, it's been more personal than professional, I would say. Of course, running for office and winning and doing all those things and being young in the legislature, those come with their own innate challenges. But one of the things I learned when Sadie was sick, my little girl, she's 3, she got diagnosed with biliary atresia, which is a very rare liver disorder, and she was in liver failure at about 4 months, and she got a liver transplant at Duke at 10 months. And between her issues and my wife actually giving birth to the twins, we had a really good pregnancy and a horrible birth. You learn different things about the fundamental inequities we have in our healthcare delivery system. And so when people ask me what's my number one political issue, my number one political issue actually is African-American female mortality, when it comes to the fact that it's across socioeconomic levels, but black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth than their white counterparts. And so, having a wife that was in ICU for 36 hours after she delivered twins, and then finding out and learning about the inequities we have in organ donation and transplant, et cetera, with Sadie has really just taught me about an entire system in the world that I had no experience with. Uniquely enough, when I was a legislator, we actually lost our hospital because my governor refused to expand Medicaid. So I knew the policy type issues, but having to experience that on multiple levels was a challenge that was it due to race, of course, but it's not somebody calling you nigger. It's more of the systemic inequities we deal with, which is what I kind of, I always tell folk that, my life's mission isn't to keep people from calling me nigger. That's like a pointless kind of journey in life. But instead, it's to unravel, deconstruct, and rebuild the systems of inequity. And living through that with both my wife and my children has been a unique pronouncement of those systemic inequities we have.
Siobhan, any challenge you want to share, and do you equate it to being a woman of color?
I would say the biggest challenge that I have faced over the past several years is just there's a fight to make sure stories are told. One of the things that the National Association of Black Journalists, our national president, encouraged all the newsrooms to stop putting negative images of black men. Coming from Memphis, which is it's a tough news market. And you would turn on the news and all you would see was black male after black male after black male. It got out of control. And so for me, the challenge is when I'm sitting in those editorial meetings, encouraging our management team, let's tell stories, that are not painting, especially people of color, in a negative light. That has been a battle. But I know that's the purpose of journalism, is to make sure that all stories are being told. That has definitely been the biggest challenge. And I think one of the things is that sometimes when you're sitting in a newsroom, sometimes you can feel the eye rolls, like, why are we telling this story? But I think for me, it's just continuing to fight to tell those stories. And the more we do it, and I can say and speak from experience, we had a story about, there was a student in Memphis, Tennessee. He was a high school student. He was homeless, and he became valedictorian. And to explain to the management, we need to tell this story. And that story was a game changer for our news market. Once I told that story, that encouraged our management at all stations to look out, to think outside the box, and to tell those stories that are important.
I love it. So I'm not going to tell my age, but when I started in broadcasting way, way back when, there was this unspoken rule, and it was very understood that light-skinned talent could, promote up to the anchor desk much easier than dark-skinned talent. And I remember being told my first job out of college that if I ever wanted to make it to the anchor desk, I'd have to chop off my hair. And I'm thinking, well, why would I want to do that? And then I looked in the newsroom one day and I realized all the white women who are on the anchor desk all had short hair. And it made me angry because I thought, what does my hair length have to do with my ability to anchor the news? So of course I said no to that. Ended up still making it to the anchor desk. But I'm curious, do you think, in terms of this, the theme of our conversation is anthems of change. I'm so glad to see this diverse color scheme of color on air, but also natural hairstyles have been accepted. But do you feel that we are a commodity, kind of what you were saying when you were in Florida, or do we run the risk of our career being derailed if we try to be independent agents?
Whew. I think things have changed. Coming in the industry, I started in 2006, and you're right, in 2006, you couldn't wear your hair naturally curly. I think now things are changing, but I still think I think colorism is real. I can speak from experience. I did a story about it. And when I was in Memphis about colorism, and research shows that managers would rather hire a light skin, if they had to choose between two black talents, they would rather hire a light skin journalist or over a dark skin journalist. I think that it's a struggle,
Yeah,
but
it is.
research has shown that. And I think, again, that's why it's up to us as journalists to get those stories out there. But I can say the best thing is that things are changing, especially when it comes to the way women are wearing their hair. There's more women wearing braids than I've ever seen in my entire career.
Yes.
And it used to be, I had braids last year when I was in Memphis, and I had to get permission to get braids. We sign something in our contracts and it says, if you change your hairstyle, you have to ask for permission. Before, I wouldn't even think to ask, but now it's like you're seeing it more. We need to see it even more often, and we really shouldn't have to ask, but it's way different. It's a lot better now than it used to be when I started in 2006.
Fantastic. Bakari, we're drawing closer to midterm elections, and obviously there's a lot
I thought you were
at
going to ask me
stake.
about my hair. I was prepared for that one.
Now, we know there's a lot at stake. So the media constantly reports the results of public opinion polls, what's the latest tweet of candidates, or their, incendiary sound bites. In your view, how much influence does the media have on whether we vote and who we vote for?
That's a good question. I'm not a journalist. I don't think that I deserve the same respect as a journalist as the three of you all who sit on stage with me. I think that you three are journalists, from the newspaper industry to the TV industry. I'm a commentator. I get paid to talk like I talk in the barbershop. And so I think that is a distinct difference. But I think that the media has an outsized role in our political process only because we allow it to. And I think this is my kind of libertarian streak of individualism that plays in here. I think we have to do a better job of sourcing our media. I think we have to do a better job of independently seeking out news and opinion. Right now, we live in a country that's very siloed, meaning that we only seek out news and opinion that reinforces our own. This is a funny kind of sociological experiment, but this is what I'll challenge the audience to do. I taught a semester at the University of Chicago, and I refer to them as my Range Rover babies. But I would ask you all to do the same kind of sociological experiment, which is, so beginning tomorrow, which is Monday, I want you to watch Fox and Friends for 30 minutes in the morning. And then next week, I want you to watch Morning Joe for 30 minutes. And then the third week, I want you to watch New Day on CNN for 30 minutes. And I want you to see the news that people consume. It will be like 2.5, with all due respect, I mean, you can watch Spectrum after that, but when you see the news that people consume, you'll realize that people are looking at like 2.5 different worlds in the way that they interpret it, and it's fascinating. I'll tell you a story about, and one of the biggest problems we have is disinformation and misinformation, but back in 2016, there was a woman who would call me often, and she was a big Hillary Clinton supporter, and CBS.con, it was a cleverly disguised website. You know, on Facebook they had these articles, and it was a cleverly disguised website. It was CBS.con, and the article stated, it was October or September, it was right before the election. The article stated that they had found ballots in a warehouse in Philadelphia that were all checked, marked for Hillary Clinton. And so it was this whole thing that Hillary Clinton's trying to steal the election. It was a month or two before the actual election. And this woman called me and she said, whatever you do, make sure Hillary doesn't get caught. And I was like, Mom, if you don't stop getting your news off Facebook. But even my mom, a very educated woman, was getting her news off Facebook, recycling that news, hitting share so often. And so while, yes, the media does play an outsized role, I always tell people that between, and this is very, 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 very boring and unsexy, but gerrymandering is the reason that democracy is falling apart, truly. But that's another TED Talk. But between gerrymandering and the 24-hour news cycle, we have somewhat polluted our airways with things that make absolutely no sense, and people are consuming it.
Thank you for breaking that down and not telling us about your hair. This next question is for all three of you. Africa, we'll start with you. I'm curious what each of you thinks about trends in media today. We've had some real newsmakers in terms of three things I'm going to ask you about, and you can pick whichever one you want to talk about, and the impact on communities of color. The COVID-19 pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and on a positive note, Kamala Harris being elected vice president. So from your perspective in the media, just what were your thoughts as far as coverage or just the news-making aspect in and of itself?
Okay, so I'm going to select COVID-19 to talk about. I come from a background of public health. And so in my news office, we emphasized, or when we did stories, we tried to emphasize things that would educate and inform the community, especially here in Greensboro and in Guilford County. We were probably one of the first counties to shut down prior to the governor shutting down our state in March of 2020. And so it was our responsibility to convey what was going on, what is COVID-19, how could you get it, what is it, what are its origins, that sort of thing. And so it was really our responsibility to inform the readers, that this was a very serious viral disease to take seriously and to follow the protocol and to not doubt the CDC and try to get away from the whole political, because when we look at the national news on the national level, things were being reported as being more political in the sense that, you got someone who says, I'm not going to wear a mask, who's actually in a leadership position. I'm going to take my mask off. I'm not going to wear a mask. We didn't have a vaccine then, and we have a vaccine now, but I wear a mask because I have that public health background, and there's things in the back of my mind that I know about that most people probably don't. But at any rate, I think that it was really important to get that information out. It was really vital to our readers, and unfortunately, we lost one of our members of our staff prior to there being a vaccine, and that was my brother-in-law. He worked as a newspaper pressman and worked with us at the Peacemaker. He worked as a newspaper pressman for the News and Record and worked with us. And that was the first, realization for everybody on my staff that, hey, this is something not to really play with. And unfortunately, when we talk about, the equity in healthcare and that sort of thing, Black people, how they say, if the white community gets a cold, Black people have pneumonia. And that's how it was hitting us, because we were the people who were going to work, driving the buses, and dealing with people coming in close contact with other people. And we were the people who were working at like a FedEx or some other places, the post office, and we were coming into contact, places where you come into contact with lots and lots of people. And so, it was really important to tell the news straight and incorporate the science and incorporate, all the facets of that need to be put out there. And that's what I think that I hope that we did it successfully. We're still in it, unfortunately, but maybe, one day we'll here in the United States, we can figure this out.
Siobhan?
COVID-19, so I was in Memphis when all of this was happening, and it was really tough being a journalist and reporting on this, because we were getting a lot of negative feedback. Because you have to remember, Memphis, you have Mississippi, they're like border states. So you have Mississippi, you have Arkansas. So, a lot of governors going back and forth about whether or not you should wear a mask. And then as a journalist, trying to convey that to the audience, it was tough. The state of journalism right now is tough, very, very tough. And so when you're I'm going into the hospitals and you're seeing talking to the families who are grieving the loss of their loved ones, and then you have your governors who are telling us as journalists, fake news and this and that, it became very hard to explain to people why a mask matters, and very hard to explain to people. We're seeing it firsthand because we're talking to the families. And even now, it's a tough job. I'll say since COVID-19, since George Floyd, the state of journalism has really been a battle, because we're losing so many journalists. I've worked with some of the best journalists in the country, and when all of this happened, we're starting to lose them left and right, because a lot of journalists have been threatened. Their lives have been at risk from reporting facts. And so it hasn't been easy.
I will take George Floyd, because I don't think that we interpret George Floyd in the correct way. Also, I love Kamala. I just spoke to her the other day, and she's like she's a very near and dear friend. By the way, she's an amazing chef. I think people should know that. She's actually like a real person. Watching people caricature her is so frustrating, because they treat the vice president a lot like they treated Hillary Clinton. And if a lot of people's opinions of Hillary Clinton are formulated today because of 30 years of like death by 1,000 cuts. And so in trying to prevent that from happening to Kamala Harris is kind of frustrating. But George Floyd, because George Floyd is unique in the way that it highlights the fact that Black folk don't understand what justice is. and we conflate terms. And so justice, first of all, is a verb, right? And I have to start with that because justice actually requires an act. But people look at George Floyd as justice, and it drives me insane because justice is George Floyd actually being here. What you saw was accountability, which you also have to raise your hand for. But I'm from the belief that every ounce of change we've ever had in this country has been because of black blood that's flown through the streets. And so when you analyze George Floyd, and people say, well, why do you say that, Bakari? I'm like, because you wouldn't have the 64, 65 Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act if you didn't have white folk actually seeing us being bludgeoned on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You wouldn't have the Fair Housing Act if Martin Luther King wouldn't have been assassinated. You wouldn't have had the Confederate flag come down in South Carolina if 9 people wouldn't have died in a church, right? So it always requires the price tag for us to have a semblance of progress is a very, very high price. And I say all that to say that when you analyze George Floyd, what had to happen for you to have accountability? And this is when people screw this up. In order to have accountability in George Floyd, you had to have a 9-minute video of a grown man crying out for his mother in a most inhumane way possible. You had to have the courage of a 17-year-old black girl, Danella Frazier, to actually videotape that act. And then what else did you have to have? You had to have a pandemic so all of you all were at home and watched it repeatedly. See, people forget that we were in the middle. The only reason George Floyd was George Floyd is because we were literally in the middle of a pandemic. So you could not turn away. If people were on their daily task and daily chores and going to work and doing these things, George Floyd would not be George Floyd. But because we had it in the middle of a pandemic, you had to watch it. You could not turn away. And then the world had to protest. Not just Minneapolis, but the world had to protest. So you had to have an inhumane act. You had to have a 17-year-old black girl that's more courageous than anybody in this room. You had to have a pandemic, which we haven't had since the Spanish flu. And then you had to have something which motivated the entire world to come outside for black folk to get accountability. Not justice, but accountability. And I think when you analyze it in that fashion, you actually get to the heart of what George Floyd really was, who he was, what it means, and then you can actually have honest discussions about it.
Thank you for that overview and your perspective, and all of which I agree. Before we take questions from the audience, Siobhan, you touched on this last question, which is for all 3 of you when it comes to facts versus fake news. In my opinion, the term fake news paved the way for assault on journalists and the media as a whole. How in your opinion, have we lost our compass when it comes to truth in journalism? Given the climate we're in, how do you apply the golden rule of fair and balanced reporting?
That's for them, because I don't have to be fair or balanced.
As far as fair and balanced reporting, I think my experience has been, even if you are fair and balanced, it's still a battle, as I mentioned earlier, for journalists. I think it's one of those where I could say with everything that has happened, it has forced journalists, you can't just, the lazy journalists, it's kind of weeded a lot of the lazy journalists out, but now it's, as I mentioned, it's a battle. And so you're constantly having to make sure that you're not going on air, reporting anything or making any mistakes. So it's really forced journalists to make sure that we are accurate. Like I said, it's been tough because when you have President Trump saying fake news, we're going out into communities, and as I mentioned, I know several journalists, including myself, who have been assaulted last year just because of the term fake news. And so it is just one of those where we as journalists, we just have to keep going and we just have to keep reporting. Like I said, it's not an easy fight. And I can't tell you how many journalists that we are losing. I mean, every single day. And I mean, it's all across the country. There are hundreds of positions that are open because a lot of journalists are just tired of going out and being assaulted or going out and having to explain facts that, we know they're true, but when you have this battle with President Trump making all kind of comments, it just makes it tough on a lot of journalists right now.
I'm sorry to hear that you personally have been assaulted. Africa, anything from the print journalism side?
So I work with a lot of student interns, and I tell them when they go and report or interview someone to be brave. It's hard to do, but I have to tell them, be brave, because someone might tell you something that's not accurate, and we're going to have to do a lot of fact checking to figure out, what is actually true versus not true. And so for me, I feel like I'm the coach, I'm the motivator, I'm the person who, we pitch stories. Now we're pitching stuff on what do you call it, like a Zoom or a FaceTime, that sort of thing. But I get a real kick out of working with younger folks, college students, sometimes high school students who want to get in it and who haven't necessarily been called, oh, you're enemy of the state, or or you're not, you're fake news, that sort of thing. Because that's demeaning, and that can really get to you. So I try to be the voice of reason and say, look, don't listen to that. You're on the right path. You're doing some good reporting. Stick with it, that sort of thing. What I've also noticed, like with the national news, like a CNN or an MSNBC, is that they often bring in, if you've noticed, they bring in people who write for the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Those folks are on the ground and they get a lot of stories, right? And then they come on the national news and the newscaster is basically asking the news writer the questions instead of asking the people who are actually involved in the story. I don't know if you all have seen that, but I see that very, very often. It's probably, to me, a recent trend in like the past maybe 5 or 6 years that I've really noticed it more that's happening. So I'm basically the cheerleader and the coach. I write too, but I really want to motivate. You want to motivate that next generation, because I hope to not be sitting in the editor's chair, forever. That's not the idea. The idea is to really promote others and inspire.
The question is, she is a newcomer to the journalism field. What advice do you have in this climate in terms of how does she get started career-wise?
I would say do a lot of internships. And as I talked about earlier, a lot of perseverance, a lot of faith. As you heard me say how tough it is in this industry, it's always been tough. It's just got tougher because of some of the things that are going on. But get you a good mentor. One thing that really helped me in my career was having people in the career who looked like me as well. Because I can say when you have conversations with African American women, sometimes the experience is a little different. So I would say it's not a bad idea to get you a mentor, someone who you trust, somebody who you can look up to. But I would just say to you, just keep going. Don't give up. Those internships are vital. And just keep going. Persistence.
I'm going to jump in because I get a lot of interns, and they came through during COVID, and it was the worst time to graduate and try to get into an actual job that pays you. You have the benefit of technology. Use your phone and create your own news story opportunities. Internships are great, but add to that every opportunity that you have to be authentically talented and put your skill set out there. Everything gets posted online now, so you can basically be freelancing until somebody sees your work, appreciates it, and then that could lead to opportunities.
I'll say one more thing too. Your social media page, make it work for you, because everyone is looking at what you post. And I cannot tell you how many calls I get from people who say, I wanted to hire this person, but I saw their social media page and it had this on there. Everything you post, it matters. So as I mentioned, just post things that you know are going to help you get that job that you're seeking.
And if you plan to post anything about our program today, please, on all your social media networks, please tag the Greensboro Public Library, the Greensboro History Museum, and the City of Greensboro. I'll put that plug in. Yes, other questions?
Mr. Sellers, can you help me understand the senator of color from your state?
No. You know,
Thank you.
the crazy thing is, in South Carolina, they always say politics makes very strange bedfellows, particularly throughout the South. Tim is actually a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine. The exact quote, and I was just walking around the house one day, and my twins were at my legs, and the Washington Post magazine was doing a profile on Tim. And people, it's weird because I'm only 37, but I've been in politics a very, very long time. And so when I got elected, I had already served for 2 terms before Tim Scott actually came to the South Carolina General Assembly. He was on county council, we knew of him. He was like a black Republican, and it was kind of like this unicorn in South Carolina, but he was very, very talented. In the Washington Post magazine, I think that's what it was, Washington Monthly or Weekly, something like that, they asked me how I felt about Tim. And I said, it's weird because I would give Tim a kidney if he called me. I also would never vote for him a day in my life. And that's the most fundamental way that I can put how we should get back to politics. You know, I don't understand the whole, like, I get it. Like, it's really hard to associate with somebody who doesn't give you the benefit of your humanity or doesn't see you as human or sees you less than. Like, I totally get that. But there are some conversations in the middle that we're just no longer having. I would never vote for Tim Scott, have no reason to. But he, in all honesty, I would give it, if we were handicapping today, a more than 50% chance that he would be a nominee for vice president in 2024.
Great program this evening. Y'all have talked about some of the problems that you faced. What gives you hope for the future, if anything?
My kids give me hope. I mean, you have to leave a better world than the one you inherited. You know, your name's Tim, right? So Tim, some of my friends disagree with me on this point, but, and it's cool. We have good discussions about it. But I come from the position, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this as well, but I come from the position that there's nothing irredeemable about this country. You just have to reimagine what she looks like. And what that means is that we have to literally deconstruct all of these systems of oppression that are around us, from the environmental injustices to the way that we violently miseducate our children in this country, to the healthcare system, to our criminal justice system, et cetera. We have to reimagine what this country looks like. And so that's where I come from. So I'm not yet jaded by reality, I guess. So I still remain decently hopeful, and my kids give me that hope.
I think that we need to be honest about our history and what happened in our history, and teach that in an honest manner and move forward. That's the only way we're going to be able to really come together and have the society that we really want. We can't be butting heads all the time. It's just not healthy under any circumstance. So, yeah.
What gives me hope is knowing that the stories that I'm telling are making a difference. What also gives me hope is knowing the journalists who haven't given up and said, we're going to keep fighting this fight. We're going to keep telling these stories. And really what gives me hope is there was a time when I almost got out of the industry last year, but there was a man, a security guard in Memphis, because I literally was about to turn my resignation in and go work for FedEx in Memphis. And I was praying, I was like, God, if you want me to stay in this industry, give me a sign. Literally went into this place, and the security guard said, oh my gosh, Siobhan, my 10-year-old granddaughter loves to watch you on TV. Whatever you do, please don't get out the business, because if you do, then I have to explain to my 10-year-old granddaughter why you quit. So it's the 10-year-old girl who's watching. And even though, as you've heard me say, it's not an easy industry to be in, but there's hope, because when I know that my stories are making a difference and I know that representation matters, that's what gives me hope.
Hello. I guess my question is, you guys were talking earlier about how far you've come, how far the industry, your respective industries have come, respective careers have come in addressing race issues, and all the strides that have taken place in fixing issues. Are there parts of your industry and your careers where you see people taking things backwards? And if so, how can that be addressed and fixed before it goes too far?
Okay, so I work at a predominantly African-American paper, but in the industry as a whole, yes, I do see things going backwards when you look in newsrooms and you don't see faces of color. Not just black people, but if you don't see anybody that's Asian or Native American, or, you don't see women, that's a problem, and it shouldn't be that way, but a lot of times it is, because to people, it's sometimes human nature for some people to gravitate towards those that are just like them. But that does not get the information or the news or create a society that actually tells the whole gamut of news stories that would be of interest to the public. Oftentimes the decision makers in newsrooms are Caucasian males, and that there needs to be an equity. That's an equity issue that needs to be faced by many newsrooms across the country and newspapers. So, a lot of times publishers, I'll go to a publisher's meeting. Not only am I sometimes the youngest person in there, but sometimes I'm the only female in there. I'm the only female editor, and here we are, and I'm thinking, here we are in 2022, what in the world is going on? But, those things can change, but you have to have people who are willing, who are in positions of authority who want to see that change happen, or who at least, if they come from or have a family where they're raising lots of daughters, you would think that they would want to promote other women in those positions. So, it's my goal to inspire and encourage other people who are working towards being in journalism, or who want to stay in journalism, or even the older person who wants to get into journalism. I want to inspire those people. I'm not here to be a dream crusher. So if that's your dream, by all means, let's work together and get it done.
He's asking, when there is someone of color being hired and they're the first person of color, is that necessarily something that needs to be stated? How do we get away from that being the focal point?
We're still having first in 2022. I think that's probably a larger indictment. One of the things I don't really give a whole lot of advice to folk, because I screw up enough. I don't feel like I'm in a position to be giving people advice. However, one of the things that I would tell you is to, if you are the first, of course, don't be the last, right? And one of the things that people, particularly young folk, how old are you? 20 what? 21. So you're like you're Generation Z. I'm a millennial. One of the things that our generations have in common is we really like to write our own obituaries, which means we really like to tell people our accomplishments. We really like to be the first. We really like to be the this or that. And so I'm not in the business of writing my own obituary. I let other people. Introductions drive me crazy. I actually don't like to come out while people are introducing me. That's how awful I am, because I just feel like there's so much more to be written. And so what I would advise you is don't even worry about what people are saying about you. Benjamin E. Mays, with all due respect, any teachers in the audience, if you are, you can be like number 2, that's whatever. Benjamin E. Mays is the greatest educator of all time. That's how you raise your hand. You can be the second best for the purposes of this discussion. But Benjamin E. Mays said, in all things that you do them so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do them better. And so my advice to you, although I'm not in the advice-giving business, but focus on just being excellent. And don't worry about being the first. Don't worry about people saying you're the first. Be the best damn chef in like a 4-county radius, right? That's what your goal should be. And don't worry about what everybody else says about you.
Last question.
I have a two-sided question. How do you separate personal opinion and bias and/or leverage it in your endeavors in your fields?
He talking to you. Cause he know you. Answer the question. Cause he know you biased and opinionated, and he want to know how you separate that. So please answer his question.
That's a Papa question, right?
That wasn't.
You don't want to hear from you? Okay. How do you separate opinion from bias?
No, no. Your bias and opinion from the news you give out.
Oh, okay. We report on the facts of the story. Who, what, when, where, why, how. You know, and go from there. And you can't say, oh, I don't like this person, I'm not going to report on them. That won't wash. Or this issue is no good, I'm just not going to do it. Because a lot of times in newsrooms, you don't have a choice of what to report on. I had somebody tell me a couple of days ago, you know, I don't think I can do this, that this is going to be really hard for me. And I'm like, you don't have a choice. Your role, my role, Siobhan's role is to report the news. We don't make the news, we report the news. We're you know, it's not about me and what I think. It's, you know, that's reserved for for a commentary page or an editorial page, not for the news, not for reporting the facts of the story and what other people say about the story. Now they might be giving you their opinion, but it's not about the news writer's opinion. Does that help some?
Also, man, you got to be, I know that this is probably different for me than them. I'm certain it's different for me than them. But you always have to be honest.
Yes.
I called somebody a nut this morning on national TV because he is a nut. And so I felt like that was a fact. But it was also slightly my opinion, and I was decently biased. But I always want to tell the truth. That's, whenever people see me, I always get two things. One, you're taller than you look on TV. And number two, you always tell it like it is. And the reason is because I always respectfully want to be as honest as I possibly can. And I also ascribe to this notion, which I guess we all kind of ascribe to this notion, that you can't argue with fools because people watching can't tell the difference. And so I try to be as honest as possible, be as truthful as possible, and keep some level of high ground.
See, Bakari's always in the crossfire, or, you know, with other pundits, I'd say, on TV. So.
And you are taught as a journalist not to have an opinion and not to show emotions. You're taught that. But what I saw the past 2 years from the newsrooms that I've been in, it changed. And so you're not supposed to have an opinion. I have seen journalists, I've worked with journalists who got fired for having an opinion, going to Twitter, going to Facebook, and then they lost their jobs. But also journalists are, because they're taught to be kind of hardcore, I saw a lot of journalists break. And a lot of journalists I worked with had to get therapy, they had to get counseling just because of everything that happened with George Floyd, from the pandemic, from the January 6th incident. And so one thing that I've encouraged a lot of my colleagues to do is to just start talking more, having conversations amongst each other, because I think that was something that really hurt journalism. Because you're taught not to have an opinion, you hold it in, you let everything bottle up inside. And so sometimes it's good to have friends or mentors or someone you can talk to, because there's no one who would say that it was easy to report on a story like George Floyd. And then there's emails that went out, you know, don't have an opinion, you know, be very careful with what you say. And so that's why I personally think it's good to have friends who you can kind of talk with behind closed doors.
And I'll just wrap with saying, from a broadcasting perspective or from the anchor desk, to me, it's important not to let your delivery be that thing that's guiding. Like, you should be able to deliver that news story without it sounding like what you think about it. If you think it's good or bad, it should be so neutral and so monotone with the appropriate inflection, but not alarmist. Sometimes you hear an anchor and they're just like really high pitched and they're stressing me out because they sound stressed out, or, you know, incredulous. Like, now I have to think this is, you know, outrageous because you're sounding the way that you may be thinking. So I think we got to go back to old school, fair, balanced. Let the people decide. Get both sides. Let the viewer or the reader decide. On that note, thank you, Bakari. Thank you, Africa. Thank you, Siobhan. We are going to wrap because Bakari does have copies of his book if you'd like to purchase, and he'll sign those in the lobby afterwards. We wanted to give you an opportunity to do that.
Thank you all so much. Carla, thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you, thank you. I want to make sure that we say to also our city staff, our city library staff who made today possible, thank you. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you so much, Beth. Thank you everyone who came out on a hot Sunday afternoon to hear this really provocative and also inspiring discussion that I know that this is the kind of conversation that we at the foundation want to have, and so we're grateful for you for telling your stories and sharing your insights. Please join us in our work. We have envelopes that are at the doors. We would gratefully receive whatever you can give to help us have conversations like this and continue to do the work that we do in the city.